What's up, Whisper Nation? We are going to talk 2021 top fantasy running back right here on the Fantasy Whispers.
Right here.
That's right. It's never too early to start discussing the 2021 fantasy football season, and we are getting started right away, right here, by talking who we think is going to be the number one fantasy football running back in the 2021 season. And Johnny, on the other mic over there, Johnny Game Time Hicks, how you doing, brother?
What's up, man? I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about these running backs. Specifically, a certain running back comes to mind. I can't wait to talk about him. But how you doing, man? How are you feeling about this episode?
Good, man. We were just sitting there off air, kind of chatting about what we thought. And I tweeted it out. You know, you can find me on Twitter at Big Travy TFW. You can find Johnny over on Twitter at Johnny_GameTime. And I was tweeting out earlier, and I just thought, blank will be the number one fantasy running back in 2021. I wanted to see what people thought. And we'll get into some of the guys.
You weren't cussing there? I thought you were like cussing.
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, not yet. I haven't got that. Pissed off just yet. No. So it's an interesting topic we got to talk about because it's likely that we're going to see somebody new. Derrick Henry in a lot of formats finishes the RB1. He had a strong year. Maybe Alvin Kamara, depending on your scoring, finishes the RB1. But we're likely to see a turnover at the position because, Johnny, over the last 10 years, only one time have we had a repeat RB1, and that was Todd Gurley. He did it in 2017, 2018. But other than that, I mean, we have turnover at the position. And so, we wanted to start the show off by going through the top 10. 2020's top 10, talking a little bit about these guys and positioning them as potential candidates to finish as the number one running back in 2021. But, Johnny, I'll start with Derrick Henry. We talked a little bit about him just now. Derrick Henry was the number one fantasy running back in most formats. Only one game, or I mentioned only one time, has somebody finished as the RB1 in back-to-back years. And so that leads me to believe that it probably won't be Derrick Henry, but what a monster of a running back this guy has been. And just he continues to do it. 2 years ago, he finished the season strong, and he capitalized on that strong finish by rattling off over 2,000 yards last year, 17 touchdowns. I mean, Johnny, he didn't have a single receiving touchdown, but it didn't matter because he scored 17 times. He put it into the end zone last year. Was just a dominant running back in most formats, was the only running back over 300 points in standard scoring. Mm-hmm. You like to see that out of Derrick Henry. I imagine if there's anybody that could repeat, it's a guy like Derrick Henry. But he's got to get the pass catching up, right? Like, that's the big thing. He's not a huge pass catcher. He just lives off volume.
Here's the other unique thing about Derrick Henry that we're not even touching on, right? Derrick Henry finished as the RB1 last year, and he is not the unanimous number one drafted RB this year. At least he hasn't been in any of our mock drafts. And so for me, I do think it's going to be difficult for him to repeat as the RB1. We're going to talk about some guys, later on this list that we do like more. We're even going to talk about a couple of guys that were injured that didn't make this list because of their injury. And so, you've said the best stat, and we got a lot of trash from people last year who said, hey, when this was my number one issue with CMC, and I had just said statistically RB1s don't repeat. And so I will go with what the statistics are telling me, because that's how I like to play. And so that's why I didn't go with CMC. Did I think he was going to get hurt? No, I didn't. But looking at Derrick Henry, the big issue with Derrick Henry is we keep asking for more and more pass catching, and he can do it. I'm not saying he can't, but he certainly is. That's not a big part of his game. And so we have to continue to rely on efficiency and on touchdowns. And he certainly can do that. You're right. But I just don't think it's going to happen again next year. I don't think Derrick Henry will repeat as the RB1 next year.
Hugely safe floor, though, I would say.
Yeah,
Derrick Henry's going to be a nice guy. He's going to be a great first-round pick. Is he going to be the number one guy? You got to have some pop to you. And I'm not saying he doesn't have pop, but the pass catching, the efficiency, something has got to give a little bit there. And I think Derrick Henry will have a tough time repeating. Johnny, the number 2 running back, and in some formats, PPR, the number 1 running back was Alvin Kamara. And Johnny, This is a guy that, similar to Derrick Henry, has all the tools in his repertoire to do it, but is going to have some change at the quarterback position, most likely.
And that's going to be the scariest and biggest piece to this whole puzzle. I mean, they're even hinting at, Drew Brees hasn't officially announced retirement yet, and they're wondering why not. Is he still thinking about possibly coming back for another year? And I'll tell you, if Drew Brees is the quarterback for next year, I understand Mr. Noodle Arm is getting out. He's close to Mr. Noodle Arm 2.0, but it doesn't matter because he can still get the ball to Alvin Kamara, and that's what you want in fantasy. Look, we all remember it, right? We all remember week 16. Christmas tree was in our living room. The presents were all wrapped and ready to be, opened on Christmas morning. But we all know what we all wanted deep down. We wanted that fantasy championship. And you know what? Alvin Kamara probably did that for you. He delivered 54.7 fantasy points on that game. Remember, it was the cleat game, right? He wore the special cleats. It was the highest of any fantasy player this season. And it won a lot of people championships. There were a lot of people who thought they won a championship, but then end up going against, Tom Brady and Mike Evans. So it didn't really work out for him. But he only had one game below double-digit fantasy points all year, despite, the change at the quarterback position. He failed to score a touchdown on only 4 games this year. And he had 7 or more catches in 7 games this year, Travis. So I think that Alvin Kamara is probably one of the safest floor running backs that we have. And I have no argument for him going as the RB1, even in the quarterback change, because he's such a big piece of that offense. But I'll be honest with you, Travis. I don't think Alvin Kamara is ultimately going to be next year's RB1.
Yeah, I just think there might be a little bit too many more variables in Alvin Kamara. We talked on the mock draft marathon or on the mock draft Monday just yesterday with Austin about Kamara's efficiency and how we should stop doubting it. The only other thing I got to say is the variables there with Taysom Hill, who did not have great games or did not give Kamara great games because he wasn't throwing to him as much. That scares me a little bit. Is he still a first rounder for me? Yes. Is he more towards the back of the first round? Probably. And we'll just see how that shakes out, though. Our number 3 from 2020 was Dalvin Cook. 8 20-plus point games and half-point PPR, Johnny. He had 4 games with 2 touchdowns or more. He was the RB2 in PPR, RB3 in standard, 100 or more all-purpose yards in 9 games. And then after 15 total games in 2 seasons to start his career, he's now had back-to-back years with 14 games. So everything lining up for Dalvin Cook. And actually, this was the most popular pick when I put this out on Twitter. We got the most answers, and in our DMs and Instagram. If you're not following us on those platforms, please do search the Fantasy Whisperers over there. But that was our most popular answer, Johnny, was Dalvin Cook. They think that everything lines up, Whisper Nation does, for Dalvin Cook. Jacob Bley, some other guys that were in there for Dalvin Cook to be the guy. So, Johnny, I got to ask you, do you think Dalvin Cook, because I think I would throw my ring in there, but he's not my number 1 guy on this list that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I don't think it's ultimately going to be Dalvin Cook. I think that offense or that team could see a little bit of a rebuilding on offense. We've already seen and heard that, Kirk Cousins could be on the move there, out of there, I should say. So then you got to think, okay, well, where are they going to go? Are they going to go into the draft? Are they going to try to get Sam Darnold? Or maybe, and then there are rumors maybe Jimmy Garoppolo is part of that exchange. And then are you a believer in Jimmy G? I do think that he could definitely turn around and hand off the ball to Dalvin Cook. But then how explosive is this offense? Ultimately, I do think that Dalvin Cook will finish as a top 5 running back. I know that a lot of people, they get attached to players on their breakout year. The one thing I will say is we kind of did expect Dalvin Cook to have a monster year this year because of the contract stuff, right? He was trying to prove himself. He was trying to get a lot of money. And so, we always ask whether or not that's a true factor for these players. But, this was his first year or first season where he played almost all of the snaps, so we got to see his true potential. Could this be really what Dalvin Cook is? Sure. But once again, I think I would expect Minnesota to regress just a little bit as a team. And so I don't think he'll be an RB1 ultimately overall. I think he'll be a top 5 though.
Yeah, I really like Dalvin Cook. I've got him in Dynasty. I think he's a fantastic pick. He's kind of a chalk pick too for RB1 based on what he was able to do last year and all that. But this number 4 guy who finished number 4 in the RB 2020 or in the RB standings in 2020 is actually my pick for 2021 RB1, and that's Jonathan Taylor. I'm going all in on JT. Love me some Jonathan Taylor. Now let's just talk a little bit about his 2020 season, right? It was kind of a tale of 2 seasons, 55% snap share or fewer in all but 2 of his first 10 games. So not getting the rock a lot, mixing in Naheem Hines was a popular thing for the Colts. But then he finished as the RB4 in standard and the RB6 in PPR. You know, this was a roller coaster of a season, Johnny. Week 10 was one of his worst games. He was at Tennessee, only had 9 touches for 37 yards. Then he went to Green Bay in week 11, got 26 touches. So you're feeling good. Then he gets COVID, misses week 12. Then he comes back versus Tennessee and not really a great game there. Goes nuclear over the last 5 weeks, Johnny. Averages 21 touches, 144 all-purpose yards, scored 8 touchdowns in that stretch. After returning from that COVID stint, no other running back scored more points than Jonathan Taylor in weeks 13 through 17. His average was 26 PPR fantasy points over that span. I am just ecstatic about the prospect of Carson Wentz coming over here because, yes, is Carson Wentz probably a world beater again? Is he MVP level again? No, probably not. But could he be just as good, if not better, than Phillip Rivers was last year? I believe so, and I believe that means good things for Jonathan Taylor. Carson Wentz has spent a lot of time throwing to his backs under Frank Reich before, but then also under Doug Peterson. So for me, I'm really excited about Carson Wentz and what that's going to do for Jonathan Taylor. This line is great. The defense is great. Everything is there, lining up talent with opportunity. So for me, Jonathan Taylor is my best bet.
All right, that's not a bad bet. I mean, we did a mock draft just the other day, and he went, top 3, and we had a really nice debate as to whether or not he should be in that top, 5 draft picks for this upcoming year. And I don't mind it because the talent is definitely there, as well as where else the talent is, Travis. That is on YouTube or right here on Facebook. With us, the Fantasy Whispers.
Periscope.
On Periscope.
Whatever platform you're following us on.
Exactly. So if you guys could do us a huge favor, if you guys could hit us with the thumbs up, hit us up with a subscribe. If you are new to our channel, put out content daily on fantasy football. And we just love interacting with the community. So we love going live. If you have comments, please drop them in there. We'd love to throw them on the screen as well. But yeah, Travis. That's all I have.
Yeah, well, that brings us to number 5, Johnny, and that's Aaron Jones. Johnny, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about Aaron Jones, although I know that we just recently did a video on Aaron Jones.
Yeah, and I'm just going to take that opportunity to plug the YouTube and say if you want to hear exactly what we think about Aaron Jones specifically, because we did just release a video on Aaron Jones, head on over to our YouTube channel, the Fantasy Whispers, and we posted this. We talked about where we thought his best landing spot would be, which I'll give a little hint, Buffalo, or we ultimately
San
that's
Fran?
not. Yeah, ultimately
San
that's
Fran,
not.
maybe. We talked about Atlanta. There's some other ones in there, Johnny.
Yeah.
I think that is the big point here, right? If we think that Aaron Jones is going to be the number 1 running back, we better know which team he's on first.
Yeah.
And so until we know that, we don't really know if we can project him as a guy to get that RB1 spot. But Johnny, a guy we're excited about, likely going to stay with his team and finish the year extremely hot. David Montgomery finished as RB6 in most scoring formats.
Yeah, so I am really excited to talk about David Montgomery here for a second because I want it to be known, Whisper Nation, that Big Travy and we were doing our show notes, and he had the audacity to actually try to say that he wanted to talk about David Montgomery as his guy. When, if you've been following along, which I know you have, you guys have known that David Montgomery, I was a David Montgomery truther from last year. I thought he was going to be really good, and he ended up really carrying a lot of teams to the championship and possibly winning the championship for you. Because, okay, I understand before the bye, Montgomery had 6 of his 10 games clock at 3.5 yards per carry or fewer. He had 0 games over 100 rushing yards, and he had scored only 2 touchdowns. I get it. It didn't look great. It looked pretty nasty. But as we know in fantasy football, Big Travy, we know it is not just a game-by-game basis is telling a whole story. You got to wait out some of the ebbs and flows because it is ultimately a long season. And I'll tell you what, after the bye, which did a little bit sorry?
The real nastiness is the way you're trying to come at me about Dave Montgomery here. That's the real nastiness. No. Realistically, I'm the one who put you on to David Montgomery here.
Oh, there we go.
You're trying to take credit for it. I can't believe it.
Hey, well, here, there's a little bit to say as to why David Montgomery popped off so much, and that would be, we saw a big injury to Tariq Cohen, who was the third down running back, but it gave the opportunity to David Montgomery, and this is an opportunity that the Bears, frankly, they thought David Montgomery could be this type of running back when they drafted him. And so you look at what he did after the bye when he got the bulk of the workload. He had 6 straight games with plus matchups where he went straight nuts. 6 games of 20 or more half-point fantasy points to close out the year. He had 8 touchdowns over the final 6 games, and he averaged 137 all-purpose yards, Big Travy, per game over that span. Ended the year as the RB6 in standard and the RB4 in PPR. I will say this. I do like David Montgomery. I thought that what we saw last year was more of an indication of what type of running back he'll be. I don't ultimately think he'll be a top 5 running back next year because I do think that there are certain factors that might, not be present. Now, if they do end up trading Tariq Cohen for another piece, then that potential could definitely be open again. But I do feel like he did have some really nice matchups down the path, down the stretch. He
became a good pass catcher. There were games where that, in those, you talked about the split, right? First half of the year was kind of bad for him, but Cohen got injured early on. And actually what ended up giving Montgomery the float during the first half of the year was his receiving work. He didn't really start turning it on the rushing work till halfway through the year. So for me, I actually think that Cohen might be a little bit less of a hindrance than we thought initially, and I think that Montgomery's kind of established himself as a way to be the focal point of this offense, no matter which way they kind of go. He kind of flashed the brilliance that he showed coming out of college that we were excited about in his rookie season. Some guy that came out of nowhere, Johnny, James Robinson, man. I wish I would have taken
nowhere.
Yeah, James Robinson, I should have taken a little bit more seriously. Friend of the show, former contributor to TFW, and in our league of record, Matthew Potvin, famously picked up James Robinson in our league of record and gave me a bunch of crap for it. And he kept saying, calling him the perennial league winner. Well, he didn't quite win leagues, but he got you close. He was a top 10 RB, number 7 in PPR and standard. You look at the way this all shaked out, Johnny. It was a weird 2020. He was undrafted. You saw the Fournette trade happen. Devine Ezigbo got injured. Raquel Armstead had COVID. And then all of a sudden, you saw Chris Thompson getting added to the roster. This looked ugly. You didn't want any part of this Jacksonville Jaguars backfield. But if you just read those couple blurbs and you saw James Robinson was the reason we were okay getting rid of Fournette. James Robinson. It was like whispers coming around here. And James Robinson burst onto the scene. I mentioned RB7. He even missed his final 2 games. And he had 1 game only under 10.5 PPR fantasy points. Half-point PPR fantasy points all year. His average per game was 14.4. This guy was a juggernaut, just got the ball consistently for the Jaguars. And I'm excited to see what happens with him next year.
Yeah, it definitely was a little bit of a doubter in the beginning, but he certainly proved me wrong for sure. I'm a believer now, and you talk about what they could do in the draft, and getting a really good quarterback, a franchise changing quarterback, and so sign me up for James Robinson, who has been going in the second round in a lot of our drafts, and I do think that he will remain a top 12 running back in 2021. Not the number one though.
Well, and Jacob Bley, who's stopping in here, I want to give him a huge shout out. He mentioned on Twitter Dalvin Cook. He says it right here again in the YouTube chat. Give me Cook. He wants Dalvin Cook as his bet. We talked about Cook at the top of the show. He's definitely a popular pick, and I would not be surprised in the least bit if he was RB1 by the end of next year. Mm-hmm. Josh Jacobs is our next guy, and I don't want to touch too much on Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs is a fine RB 10 to 15 range. I think that's well within his range of outcomes. I just don't see a scenario without the pass catching in his repertoire and without a proven track record of that Jacobs is going to be in as the number one RB. So I'm going to skim over him. And Johnny, give you the mic here for Nick Chubb, because this is another guy, probably one of my favorite answers that we got today. Shout out to Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. Shout out to you. Nick Chubb is your pick. And he finished as RB9 in 2020. So go ahead and talk to us a little bit about Nick Chubb.
I am so incredibly excited for Nick Chubb as I'm just going to say it now. I was going to wait, Travis. I was going to wait. I was going to build the case, and then I was going to come in with the, I was going to give a bunch of jabs and then come in with the right hook and tell you the final thing. And that was that Nick Chubb will be the RB1 in 2021, but I just can't. I can't wait until the end. I want to tell you now, so that way you can understand my thought process as I break down all of these things, and you can just really get a sense of how good of a running back Nick Chubb truly is. Okay, because that's where it ultimately comes from. I mean, we're talking about football, February 23rd, right? So a lot of this is forecasting what could possibly happen in the offseason, things like that. But what I don't need to forecast to you is just how good Nick Chubb is. Since 2018, Big Travy, there's only two players in the NFL with 3,500 rushing yards and 25 rushing touchdowns. We talked about one of them earlier, and guess what? He was the RB1 last year, and that was Derrick Henry. The other player, Nick Chubb. All right. Nick Chubb pass blocking since 2019. He's had 102 snaps, which is a little bit low. Why? Because they use Kareem Hunt as that third down, so he's not quite in there for a lot of pass catching. But if you look at what he does when he is in there, Travis, 102 snaps, he only has given up 4 quarterback pressures and 0 sacks allowed. So he's a very good pass blocker. They just happen to have a really, really talented running back behind him that can also pass block. So they use them both to keep him fresh. Last thing I'll say about Nick Chubb, he has the most 100 plus rushing yards per game since 2019. Derrick Henry is number 1, and he has 16 of those games. Nick Chubb is number 2 with 13, and he's tied with Dalvin Cook at who also has 13. My big point here is, Travis, I'm bringing up guys who we've talked about on this podcast earlier in this show as being ranked way higher, and yet we have Nick Chubb ranked in general when we do mock drafts. He's in the second half of the draft of the first round, and I think it's a travesty. And if you're looking at a running back that truly has all the assets and the skills to be an RB1, it is Nick Chubb. It's just the opportunity, and it's the guy behind him, and Kareem Hunt. And we'll talk about next, because he finished as the RB10, which is wild that 2 running backs finished in the top 10 on the same team. But Travis, that's the only concern that's the only thing that you can bring up that would put a dent into Nick Chubb's, on whether or not he can be an RB1. But to me, if he gets all of the 16 games and doesn't get injured last year, I truly believe he pushes for that RB1 spot, even though he's splitting, because they keep him so fresh. He averages over 5 yards per carry.
Yeah, a little perspective here, right? Alvin Kamara only had 187 rushing attempts, and I know he makes his heyday in the receiving end, but he was the RB2, right? And so for reference, Nick Chubb got 190 attempts last year, so more attempts in 4 fewer games than Alvin Kamara. So I think just to note that the Browns want to be a run-first team, no matter if they have Chubb, Hunt, both of them, what's going on, they are going to run a run first. And Chubb is going to continue to dominate as a rusher. He's been one of the best prospects we've seen to come out, one of the best pure rushers we've seen in the last few years, and he continues to do it behind a really tremendous offensive line. Everything's there for Nick Chubb to do it. I would say that Kareem Hunt maybe needs to take a step away, either via injury or trade or something, for it to really be a sure thing, or is closer to a sure thing. But it can definitely still happen. It just needs to be more of an anomaly, I would say, on the limited usage. That brings us to number 10 in the 2020 season. That was Kareem Hunt. Not much to say here, because I think something conversely would have to happen to Chubb for him to get there. But an interesting note here is Chubb was down for a few games last year, those 4 games, and Kareem Hunt did not really show up as an RB1 during that span. So not exactly a guy that we think can hit that RB1 status. Before we go, and obviously if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe. No matter what platform you're watching us on, make sure you like and comment who your RB1 pick is for 2021. But we wanted to talk about some guys that are not on the top 10 from 2020, either via injury or via just kind of lack of production because they were a rookie coming in. So we have some honorable mentions, some dark horses. John, I'm just going to run through these, and if any of these names stick out to you, just maybe make a couple comments on them. CMC obviously is somebody that will be drafted in the top 5 that we think could be the guy. Saquon Barkley similarly will be drafted in the RB1 or in the first round. Probably could be a guy. DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders, Antonio Gibson, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, and then Ezekiel Elliott I wanted to throw up here because he's another guy that we could be talking about to make a bounce back and run at that RB1 position. And we've also got Chris Carson, Miles Sanders, and CH. Some other guys that are within the mix that we could talk about. Johnny, what were your thoughts on some of these guys in this list?
I mean, definitely, I do expect CMC and Saquon to be in the top 10 conversation. Zeke, yes, there's intrigue there. There are some good arguments to say that he should be back in the top 5 overall, but then there are some arguments that could say the opposite. So for me, I still I want to do a little bit more research before I say that Zeke could go back to being the number 1 overall running back in 2021. I do want to give a shout out once more to our number 1 fan, Jacob Bley. He DM'd us and he had said that Cam Akers was his dark horse to be the RB1 overall in 2021. And I do think that is a very interesting pick because if you look at what LA Rams did at the end of last year, they really trusted him and they really leaned on Cam Akers to be that bell cow running back. And now you're going to get him a quarterback who not only we've seen likes to dump off to their running back, but 2, will move that offense a lot more efficient than Jared Goff will. And so I think Cam Akers definitely will have the opportunity and the chance to make a run at maybe the top 5, and potentially, if he gets lucky in some situations, could be that number 1 overall running back. Let's remember that Todd Gurley was from the same offense a few years ago and finished as the number 1 overall running back. It's the system, people, not necessarily the players all the time that do this and get
and it's done. Like when you can marry the system with a talented running back, which we saw Cam Akers be at the end of last year, that is something to take note of. Justin Credible coming in late here saying, I think Chubb would have been the number 1 RB if it wasn't for the injury. Yeah, I think that lines up really well with what Johnny's take is, and that he believes Nick Chubb is one of the best bets, if not the best bet, to be the RB1 in 2021. As always, Whisper Nation, if you want to get in on the conversation, make sure you comment below and let us know on any platform you're watching this on. We appreciate your support. Make sure you subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you're not already, and that you follow us on any platform that you would like to do. Johnny, any last final thoughts here, man, or should we send Whisper Nation on the road here?
Let's send Whisper Nation on the road on a good Taco Tuesday.
Travis. Yes. Grub on some tacos tonight. I will not be having tacos. I'm dieting a little bit, trying to get down to Slim Travy. So tacos are the window for me tonight. But please, Whisper Nation, live vicariously, or let me live vicariously through you, and have some tacos tonight for Big Travy. I actually watched this video. It's kind of sick that I would watch these videos. But this guy made a giant taco out of a pepperoni pizza as the shell.
Wow.
So, well, yeah.
A taco pizza.
Yeah, and I was salivating. I'm salivating now thinking about it. But yes, Whisper Nation, for Johnny Game Time Hicks, I'm Big Travy. We are the Fantasy Whisperers. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you tomorrow. Peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.